Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Hey, this week I want to take us back to our childhood, and I want to examine three emblematic words that your parents probably told you more times than you wanted to hear. And those three words were, don't do it. Now, from the early formative years of your life, my life, it was probably a common theme that we all heard from our parents as we grew up as kids. We heard it when we got caught, like me, climbing up the back of the chair to get on the countertop so I could get to the cookie jar that mom always hid on the top of the refrigerator. Or maybe we heard it when we found dad's ladder and we drug it out of the shed and we leaned it up against the side of the house and mom caught us climbing up the ladder to get onto the roof. Those three emblematic words that you and I have often heard with the best of intention from our parents, all designed to keep us safe. Don't do it. Now, let me encourage you to just take a moment and think back to your own past. How many times, if you were really honest, do you recall a parent, a grandparent, maybe an aunt or an uncle, maybe a neighbor that was kind of the community mom? Maybe it was a school teacher or a Sunday school teacher, or maybe it was a pastor, a priest, a rabbi, or some authority figure, maybe a law enforcement officer that spoke into your life those three cautionary words: don't do it. Now, if you think about it, they're three simple words, and for most of the time by our parents and authority figures in our lives, it was intended for our safety. But sadly, it came to epitomize the very limitations that our parents and authority figures began to place on our lives. Now, often there was a well-rounded rationale behind the three words, don't do it. And that's something I really appreciated from my parents. They not only said, don't do it, they took the time to explain why. But I mean, think about it. Parents don't want us falling off a roof. They don't want us gorging on cookies. They don't want us sticking a knife or a fork in an electrical outlet. They don't want us walking aimlessly up and down a busy street in the middle of the day. They don't want us jumping in a swimming pool or jumping in a creek when we don't know how to swim and nobody's there to watch us. I get it. Don't do it was important to our parents for our welfare and our well-being. But for many of us, don't do it extended beyond just acts that we would engage in, our parents didn't like, but it also extended into what our parents wanted us to see, to hear, and to speak. It's like the three famous monkeys: monkey see, monkey hear, monkey do. There were certain shows in my parents' house that were taboo. We weren't even allowed to watch things like soap operas back as I was growing up, a child of the 60s. Now, there were certain types of magazines that my parents didn't want me to view for probably obvious reasons. There were certain types of musics my parents didn't want me to listen to, and there were certain types of words my parents didn't want to hear coming out of my mouth. Don't do it. Don't listen to it. Don't look at it. Don't say it. That don't became a powerful moniker in our lives. Now, with the best of intentions, our parents' best efforts in this don't do it was what? To instill morals, values, a belief system, and character into our lives. It was our parents' attempt to teach us the proper ways of conduct, how to interact and engage with other people. It was teaching us expected norms of behavior, both in public and in private. And boy, oh boy, do we need some of that today. But it was really teaching us to value ourselves and to learn to value other people. But there were times, and I've got to admit, in my own life, there were times when my parents sometimes told me to do certain things or not do certain things as a child or as a teenager or even as an adult that simply didn't make sense. One I think back and I laugh at often is a story my mom often tells about how her father, my grandfather, would tell my mom that she couldn't go get in the creek with her brothers until she learned how to swim. Now, think about the insanity of that statement. You can't get in the water until you learn how to swim, but you can't learn how to swim until you get in the water. Or another time when my grandfather told my mom she couldn't get behind the wheel of the car until she learned how to drive. Again, it's an oxymoron. If you don't get behind the wheel of a car, you're never going to learn to drive. And if you never learn to drive, why in the world would you want to get behind the wheel of a car? Maybe that's why my mom never learned to swim. I remember for my mom, it was a big deal when I was about 8 or 10 years of age for my mom to actually get in a swimming pool with my sister and I and my dad. And we were amazed when my mom got in water that was over waist deep. And I will never forget the day I watched my mom for the very first time hold her nose and put her head under water. She came up shocked and amazed that she wasn't dead. But for my mom, it was an amazing experience that she conquered a don't do it fear. But that probably also explains why my mom didn't learn how to drive until she enrolled herself in a summer driver's education program at Arkansas Tech University in Russellville, Arkansas at the age of 35. Now, when we've been told again and again and again all throughout our lives, don't do it, this can have an unintended consequence of limiting our lives in unexpected ways. Now, you got to remember, we are all creatures of habit, and we have this evolutionary system built into us in the amygdala, the fight or flight syndrome that wants to keep us in the status quo. And if through our entire formative young lives, we've been conditioned, don't do this, don't do that, we've ended up becoming conditioned with limiting beliefs. And we've also been conditioned to have a resistance to investigate, to explore, and to attempt what hasn't been done before. And as a result of that, whether our parents realize it or not, they were programming us for mediocrity. I'll say that again. Whether they realize it or not, our parents were programming us for mediocrity. And sadly, far too sadly, as I look around the United States and around the world as I travel, I see far too many people that have grown up in a world of don't do it, and they've grown accustomed to average, mediocre, lackluster, and sadly, they're okay with that. Well, good enough is good enough, and that's good enough. That seems to be the way most people, the 95 percenters as I call them, live life. Now, I can tell you right now, this is not a recipe for success. Now, a few weeks ago, I had an opportunity to share a stage with a good friend, Al Casedo, and we were at a conference where we were speaking on stage. Now, Al is a very highly successful financial professional, and he shared his wisdom and his insights on CNBC, on Fox Business, and other major media outlets. And as Al was engaging an audience of financial professionals, exploring some unique opportunities Al was presenting to the group, Al made a very powerful statement that ties in directly into the world of don't do it. Now, Al was talking about the financial services industry, and here's what he said, and it had great power to the people in the room. Al said this, the industry, talking about the financial services industry, and I think really it's true of any industry, the industry always pushes back against the next thing. As I thought about Al's statement, and when I heard it, I immediately wrote it down in a little book that I keep with me everywhere I go, because I never know when an aha moment is going to show up that get an opportunity to flesh it out and talk about, just like what I'm doing in today's podcast. So as I made that note and I went back to my hotel room later that night, I thought about more than 3 decades of me working in the financial services space as a sales, marketing, and communication coach and trainer. It's an industry I love, but as I thought about that statement, the industry always pushes back against the next thing. I've got to concur that Al is 100% right. Let me give you an example why I say that. Roughly 30 years ago, career organizations like Prudential, MetLife, and some of the other older established mainline companies, they taught new recruits a very simple marketing system. You make a list of the names of 100 people you know, and you network through that list. You begin to approach them and attempt to sell them life insurance. And through those individuals, you want to get introduced to their inner circle, the 8 or 10 people they know. And that's how you build a referral-based business. Now, Prudential in particular had what they called the one card system. It was an antiquated paper version of a CRM to track leads, appointments, and annual reviews. Now, that was the world of financial services back 30 years ago. Now, fast forward about a decade later, and the focus shifted from a referral based business model to a prospecting model. The focus shifted from working and networking through the people that you knew and getting those warm introductions. It shifted to doing seminars in libraries, in hotels, in community and civic centers, in churches, and other meeting venues that might be available in a local community. The presenter would stand up and share an educational message. He or she would take questions from the audience. They would extend some offer to meet and go through the next steps of what they talked about. They would schedule appointments, and then they would follow up to meet with interested prospects, either in their office or in the prospect's home. Well, what happened? The old guard, the old established industry began to push back against the seminar approach. They wanted to defend what was working for them, and they wanted to remain relevant in the workplace. So what were they telling financial professionals? Don't do it. The old way is okay. Be content with the status quo. And then the shift again shifted from what I call no food or educational seminars to the seminar and a meal approach, a dinner seminar as it's often called today. What happened? They offered prospective clients an opportunity not just to learn an important message, but to enjoy a complimentary dinner as an enticement for the seminar presentation that was going to follow. And oftentimes these were at higher end restaurants that many individuals, the prospects they were seeking, either enjoyed eating at or had never had the opportunity to grace with their presence. So after the dinner was served, the presenter would share an educational message of some sort. He would extend an offer to meet. He would book appointments at the restaurant, and then that individual would meet with prospects in his or her office or, again, in the prospect's home. And now, once again, the new old guard, notice, the new old guard began to protest. They argued that people were only coming for the food and they would never buy or engage with a presenter as a result of a dinner seminar event. Again, they wanted to maintain the status quo. They wanted to remain relevant. And what did they say? Don't do it. Now, fast forward a few years later, and technological advances now made it possible to deliver these very same messages that they were doing in libraries and hotels and at dinner events across the country, and they started to deliver seminars online. The webinar became the new fad in the industry. Prospects didn't have to drive across town. The presenter didn't have to go and set up all of this equipment in advance, and he didn't have to pay for meals for the people that came to lick the plate and never had the intention of buying anything. And as a result of that, the people that showed up were interested in the message, but they could attend from the comfort and privacy of their own home. Once again, the presenter would share an educational message, would book appointments with those that are interested, and then would visit with those prospects in his or her office or in the prospect's home. And then once again, the new old guard balked at this. They began to argue, again to stay relevant, that people weren't going to show up for an online event. Much more, were they going to stick around long enough for this to be a viable selling tool? They believed that you needed to be face to face and belly to belly, live in a room to get the engagement, to get people to take action. So what were they saying? Don't do it. Now, as technology continued to advance, what we see today are cutting edge financial professionals that continue to discover new and innovative ways to engage with their clients and to engage with prospects. Facebook Live, LinkedIn, social media marketing, and even virtual workshops. Now, the virtual workshops have expanded beyond just a webinar because the presenter is going to present an educational message. They're going to schedule appointments, and then they're going to engage with those prospects through Zoom, through Teams, through GoTo, or some other online platform, and it avoids the need for either party to travel. A financial professional today can do business in multiple states at one time, assuming they're properly licensed in those states, using technology available today. And not only can they make the presentation, they can actually make the sale doing it 100% digital where just a few years ago, that wasn't possible. So, what do you think happened as a result of that? Yeah, you guessed it. The new old guard began to push back. They began to warn financial professionals that were entertaining this next new thing that consumers wanted face to face interaction. They didn't want to meet with somebody on a Zoom screen. They'd done that through Zoom and they were done with it. They wanted to get back out, have dinners, and do things old school way again. They did not believe that people would show up and stay on and not only do that, but book an appointment and then have the follow up appointment digitally with the financial advisor unless they could truly be belly to belly, face to face in the same room. They began to stress over and over again that consumers would be unwilling to engage in financial planning, share pertinent information, and much less sign an application for financial products or services over the internet. They didn't believe a streaming platform could allow an individual to do business virtually. What was the new old regime saying? Don't do it. Again, what they learn from their parents and what they learn from authority figures, they find themselves doing in business. And as a result of that, many of them missed the opportunity to embrace the next thing and to add that to what they were doing that was already successful and scale their success. So, really, if you think about it, what was happening? In each of these scenarios, the establishment, if we want to call them that, was seeking to defend the status quo. They wanted to keep things as they were because it was comfortable, it was working, and at some level, it was successful. So, why would you change what's working for something that is yet unproven? Well, if you think about it, this feeds into the programming that you and I were soft wired in our brains and in our thinking during those early formative years of our lives. Think back to what our parents did. They trained us to tread carefully. They trained us to stay inside the lines. They trained us not to take undue, unnecessary risk, and sometimes they didn't want us taking any risks at all. They taught us to avoid what was unknown, what was unfamiliar, what was unpredictable, and what was uncomfortable. They understood the fight or flight methodology, and they wanted to make sure that we did too. And anything that was new or innovative or out of the box was considered scary. And as a result of that, the amygdala kicked in and began to cause us to think that that was dangerous when it was simply something that was unfamiliar. Now, all of this reinforces our primary instinct for self-preservation, but sadly, it also trains us to see any opportunity to learn, to grow, to improve, or to embrace something new and innovative as something we shouldn't do and we should avoid at all cost. So as a result, what happens? If we embrace the don't do it mindset, it stymies our growth, it limits our potential, and it restrains us from pursuing opportunities that could lead to more success in our lives. Now, hear me when I say this because this is an important statement. And if you get nothing else out of today's podcast, I want you to get this. When we stop forward thinking, we stop moving forward. Now, let me say that again because that's important. When we stop forward thinking, we stop moving forward. Because when don't do it becomes the accepted mode of behavior, guess what happens? We start to see the world through the lens of what we can't do or shouldn't do or won't do because it's scary, rather than seeing the opportunities that are before us every day and realizing there is an opportunity to try something new we've never done before and have an opportunity to experience success at a higher level. We've forgotten the times we overcame this don't do it mindset when we learned to ride a tricycle, when we learned to ride a bicycle with the training wheels off, when we learned to jump off the diving board for the first time and swim in the deep water. We forget that don't do it mindset was overcome time and time again because we heard it so many times. We embraced it and we accepted it as the way you and I are supposed to live lives. And when we do that, we have allowed a formula to be written in our brains as programming for an average, mediocre, lackluster life. So here's my question as it relates to that. Are you okay with being part of the 95 percenters, living an average, mediocre, lackluster life and settling for less than the best? So that really begs the question then, how do we overcome this don't do it mindset? How do we really shift our thinking from what we can't do or what we shouldn't do to embrace the world of I can and I will? Well, let's once again go back to our childhood and let's examine what happened and how we overcome it. When our parents were telling us, don't do it, one of the things they were attempting to do was at some level quell our curiosity. As kids growing up, we were curious. We wanted to know what we didn't know, and we were constantly exploring. We were touching, we were feeling, we were looking, we were constantly in this mode of exploring the world around us to try to discover anything and everything that existed in it. When I think back to my curiosity as a kid, my inquisitive nature caused me to really wonder, how could I get to the cookie jar on top of the refrigerator that mom always kept up there to keep the cookies out of the reach of my sister and I? How could I climb to the top of the big tree in my grandparents' front yard that was taller than their 3-story house? How could I go and explore that deep, dark, wooded area at the edge of town that my parents told me it's a dangerous place full of snakes and bugs, and you don't need to go in there without a parent? Or maybe it was my inquisitive nature. I wanted to go swing from a rope like Tarzan and dive into the creek in the middle of nowhere in those deep, dark woods I wasn't supposed to go as a child. Or maybe it was the opportunity to go climb a bluff and then jump off the bluff into the fast flowing river below and then swim back to the bank, catch my breath, repeat, climb, jump again. That was the world of inquisitive nature that I lived in. Now, parents with the best of intention, what did they do? They began through this don't do it instruction that they gave us over and over again. They began to stifle our creativity, our curiosity. They began to negate our inquisitive nature, and they wanted us to embrace the safety of the status quo. They wanted us to understand that avoiding these dangerous things and not being willing to let our curiosity get the best of it was essential to our welfare and our well-being. And I can tell you at some level, it's probably true. I got my share of bruises and bangs and stitches doing things I probably shouldn't have been doing by violating the don't do it rule in my own life, as my curious nature sometimes took the better of me. But I can also tell you that I discovered that I was capable of saying, doing, and becoming much, much more than mom and dad maybe believed I was capable of doing or wanted me to wait and experience or attempt that later on in life. But as a result of our parents with the best of intentions, don't do it became a way of life for far too many of us. The 95 percenters, as I call them. And as a result of that, it holds the 95% back from living a life that's committed to asking the question, what's next? And then exploring what that looks like. So as a result, if we're part of that 95% of the don't do it mindset, what happens? When we see or we hear, here's the next thing, what do? Our mind immediately starts making excuses when that next thing comes along and it challenges the status quo of the lives that you and I have grown to accept. Now, those excuses can take the form of all the reasons we can't or shouldn't, all the reasons why we're going to fail and not succeed, and we're going to make a detailed list of all the things that we lack and all the inadequacies we have that are going to limit our opportunity to be successful if we even tried. And as a result of that, with excuse after excuse after excuse, we talk ourselves out of even trying to get out of the status quo of average, mediocre, lackluster, and step into that uncomfortable place where success awaits. So our mind is doing what? It is subconsciously responding to our don't do it programming that we've had instilled in our brain since the early formative years of our lives, and it leaves us stuck where we are, as we are, unchanged. And that's why far too many extraordinary people end up living ordinary lives. They accept average, mediocre, and lackluster as normal. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that this is not a recipe for success. So that begs the question, how do we reprogram our minds to eliminate don't do it from our thinking? Two simple words: personal growth. Black belt leaders are committed to daily becoming a better version of who they are and what they do every single day. Now, why is that important? Because personal growth is your setup for when the next best thing comes along. Now, daily growth reignites our curious, inquisitive nature. Because as we're learning from successful people, as we're daily reading books of inspiration, edification, adoration, education, and information, we are learning things that are stretching the quality of our thinking. We're getting curious about the world around us, and we're starting to look for what's next. That is what daily growth does for us. Daily growth enhances the quality of our thinking. And when we can enhance the quality of our thinking, we're going to enhance the quality of our saying, our doing, and our becoming. Now, daily growth is that relentless pursuit of black belt excellence in our lives, where every day we strive to be a little bit better than the day before. And at that point, when we embrace that relentless pursuit of black belt excellence, we get comfortable living in that uncomfortable place where growth happens and opportunity shows up. Now, here's what I can tell you about personal growth. When you and I engage in personal growth activities, we are willfully venturing into the unknown, the unfamiliar, the uncomfortable, and the uncommon. And the more we venture there, the more we know, the more familiar we become, the more comfortable we get, and the more common that it feels to us. And as we do that, it lets us know that if we go even farther into the unknown, into the unfamiliar, into the uncomfortable, and into the uncommon, we're going to experience more knowing, more familiarity, more comfortability, and more commonness in accepting the opportunities that wait for us there. We begin to relentlessly pursue them. It's why we're stretching the quality of our thinking, discovering we're capable of saying, doing, and becoming more, and experiencing more success as we see and seize opportunities and develop ourselves to take advantage of those and experience more success in our lives. When we engage in personal growth, we also elevate the belief in ourselves and what we're capable of accomplishing. That is powerful. You know, as I talked about in last week's podcast, Alexander the Great believed that he could never be defeated in battle. And as a result of that, he passed that supreme confidence in himself on to his soldiers, and they conquered the known world and never lost a battle. So when we elevate our belief in ourselves, we elevate our capacity to be unstoppable. Personal growth allows us to reprogram our thoughts. We reprogram our thoughts to reject don't do it thinking and to embrace I can and I will thinking. It's that augmentino, I will persist until I succeed. You know, I've said it before in the podcast. I'm going to say it again. 95% of the world is content to live in the world of don't do it. They're okay with remaining where they are, as they are, living far below their potential. I don't believe because you're listening to the podcast that you want to be one of the 95. I think you want to be one of the 5% who is willing to live in the world of I can and I will. And that's a shift in mindset that happens as we engage in daily personal growth. Now, it's also important to remember that this 95% are going to be the very same people who are constantly pushing back against the very next thing and they're content to let opportunity after opportunity pass them by. And they're also going to be the ones when they see you considering the next thing, they're going to be the ones that poo-poo that and say, no, 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 you don't want to go there. That's unfamiliar. That's dangerous. That's uncomfortable. And you don't want to go there because you might fail. Well, guess what? You might also succeed, but you're never going to know until you try. So here's what I'm here to tell you. Don't let the 95% dictate what success looks like to you. You know, it's important to remember, and I talk about it in my book, Black Belt Secrets of Success, where I outline the success principles that men and women throughout history have embraced and lived, and that's what's helped made them successful. One of those success tips is this: success only happens outside your comfort zone. Now think about that for a minute. If you allow others to dictate what success looks like for you, you're going to get the same level of success that they got. Are you content to be with the 95 that is okay with average, mediocre, lackluster, and good enough that's good enough is good enough? Remember, real success only happens outside your comfort zone. And it's the 5% that are willing to do away with don't do it thinking and embrace and accept I can and I will thinking that lets them get into that uncomfortable place where growth happens and opportunity shows up. Remember this, and this is another success principle from my book, Black Belt Secrets of Success. Ordinary people become extraordinary when they're willing to say and do and become what ordinary people want. Let me say that again. Ordinary people, the 95%, become extraordinary, the 5%, when they are willing to say, do, and become what the 95%, what ordinary people want. And it's a simple mindset choice. You know, I think back to a quote I share often from my friend and mentor, Chris Robinson, and I love this quote. He says, it's not that you can't, but it's that you won't. And that choice is yours. Remember, ordinary people become extraordinary when they're willing to say, do, and become what ordinary people want. So here's my challenge to you as I wrap up today's podcast. And it's a very simple challenge. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to choose to say no to don't do it. And I want you to choose to say yes to I can and I will. When you do that and you make that shift in thinking, watch what happens in your life. Now, it's daily personal growth that makes that possible, and it stretches your belief in what you can and will achieve. Daily personal growth is also going to boost your confidence because you're going to get comfortable being in that uncomfortable place where growth happens and opportunities exist. Remember, successful people do daily what unsuccessful people do sometimes or not at all. That's why personal growth is important. And ordinary people become extraordinary when they're willing to say, do, and become what ordinary people won't. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.